The things that make your life worth living are the very things that introduce fragility and vulnerability into our lives.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolsky.
And I'm Rudy Sallow.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a good life, a happy life. And our guest today is philosophy professor, author of The Outward Path, The Wisdom of the Aztecs, Dr. Sebastian Purcell. We're definitely learning something new today. I have not been familiar with Aztec philosophy at all, so thank you, Sebastian, for this wonderful work. It centers on the idea of ethics, and ethical theory has, made all sorts of changes from the ancient Greeks. There's this working on virtue, on character development. You have the introduction of a Judeo-Christian context. You take care of the widow, the orphan, the alien. Then you even have this very American idea of ethical egoism, thanks to Ayn Rand. And what we have here, the outward path, is a different way of understanding what it means to be good, what it means to live well. In ethical theory, the reason why it's important is because it starts with the foundation of what does it mean to be human? And then we want to organize our lives in such a way to flourish, to attain that goodness, that happiness. And then that's where you have this structure of rules. What is the best way? And then that filters into our legal system. If somebody does something wrong, we have to have some sort of a basis of, well, how do you define wrong or how do you define right in order to organize our laws, hold people accountable? So the notion of ethics is extremely important for the way in which we navigate our lives. And a lot of our ethical theories, when it comes to the United States, center around the individual. That's the starting point. The individual needs to take care of themselves, work on their own development, and then you can go and assist other people. And with the outward path in this philosophy of the Aztecs that we learn from Sebastian is that it starts outward with the community, and then that's how the individual grows. So it's really cool, a different framework, a different way of thinking. What say you, Rudy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bravo is what I'm thinking. What I was really looking forward to in this episode, my first legal job, it was in Mexico City, the summer between my first year and second year of law school. Very, 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 very little exposure to Mexican as well as Central American history. And while I was in Mexico City, I really got into learning more of that fascinating history. And one of the coolest moments of my life was going to the Museum of Arqueopelaquio or whatever. I used to speak really good Spanish, even almost perfect legal Spanish, but today it sucks. My bad. And seeing the Aztec calendar, the actual Aztec calendar, growing up in Los Angeles, seeing Aztec symbols, Aztec calendar symbols, seeing that's one thing. But when you actually see the stone calendar in front of your eyes and how large it was and how amazing it was, it's beyond inspiring. It's something that's been burned inside of my brain.
I'm feeling a bit envious. That sounds really cool, Rudy.
Mexico City is one of the coolest
Aztec
cities.
calendar?
Yeah, it's one of the greatest cities I've ever been in my entire life.
Cool.
One of my closest friends was just there, spent a week there, and he agrees with me. It's very, very, very cool that you can actually see that with your own eyes. So if this episode does anything for you and gets you interested in it, go take a visit to Mexico City.
I like these different frameworks of thinking. Sometimes you don't even realize that you are locked into a framework until somebody comes along and says, hey, there's another way of viewing this. It reminds me of when I was learning about the game Go. I want to say it's Japanese. I'm used to playing chess. All of our dynamics with games are pretty much there's a team on one side and on the other, and the goal is to get to the other side. Like even in basketball and football and chess, it's to get to the other side. And then I remember sitting down and trying to play Go for the first time. Actually, it was with Drew Dalton, who was a former guest on the pod. I sat and I looked at the board and my mind was just trying to rethink, because it was a completely different framework. And it's such a great exercise for the brain. It's great for critical thinking. So when we are thinking about what is good and what is right, we might be locked into a particular framework that we're not aware of until we're introduced to something else, and it just expands our capacity to view the world and understand possibilities. For those of you who love philosophy, those of you who are interested in the Aztecs, those of you who are interested in ethics, or if you just want to start 2026 on a good note, have some some good news, some pleasant thing to listen to about what it means to enjoy your life, save this episode, send it to a friend. Your friends are going to want to hear this too. Remember to go to our Patreon, patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. Support the pod so we can keep giving you great content that you love to hear. And we've got a new book out, Interview with Intention, for people interested in podcasting, or send that to a friend who's in podcasting. Okay, Rudy, now it's my turn to ask you, what are we going to call this?
Good question. Can we say everyday philosophy and wisdom from the Aztecs?
Ooh, I love that. Yes. And this time, Rudy, I promise I'll get the title just right.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I like your New Year's resolution that you're actually going to apply.
Listen
my
more to
suggestion.
Rudy.
Yes, please do. It's not just willy-nilly. These are things that I think a lot about. So appreciate it.
And, a lot of people can really use this resolution. Listen more to Rudy. Listen more to Good is in the Details.
Amen.
Okay? All right, let's get talking about the outward path with Sebastian. When I was seeing this contrast between the historical, let's say, ancient Greek notion, or even the Buddhist notion of the good life as something that starts inward. Actually, do you know a book by Karl Jaspers? I think it's called Jesus, Socrates, Buddha, Confucius.
Yes, I've definitely had that recommended to me multiple times, and I've never gotten around to reading it, but I know of it.
Hold on a second. Wait. You didn't finish the book title. The rest of it is Walk into a Bar, right?
No.
I'm sorry. It's my bad. Sorry about that.
I always get the order of the names wrong, but I had assigned it to an existentialism class, and I really liked the way that Jaspers had put together these four thinkers, and what they had in common, what caught my attention from the intro of your book, was this idea that the truth is within, it's inward. So I'm really interested in this Aztec notion that everything is outward, that the good life focuses out, not in. So this is outside the perimeter of my comfort, my academic comfort zone, and I'm really excited to learn from you. Let's talk about that, what the good life is for the Aztecs, how can we use it for our everyday?
It stemmed from a personal interest, in part, like biographical, but on the other hand, what I found was something unusual. In one sense, it was interesting to see that they were probably like what we would call virtue ethicists, but in another sense, they seem to have just, I don't know, this strange way of approaching typical virtue ethical topics with a different angle, from their conception of the good to how virtues seem to operate for them. And it took me a long time to figure out what exactly all of the social role stuff was, how they talk about honor. There are a variety of things that I couldn't easily fit into something like Aristotle or Confucius or something like that. And that made it just an interesting academic project. I thought it would also be useful for people. That's the other thing that I found. A ton of just regular useful advice, which you don't really get in Aristotle. You do kind of get that more in the Stoics, though. And a lot of the Buddhist tradition focuses on practical techniques for how to live better. The Aztecs had a lot of that. Frankly, I just experimented. I was like, let's try them. Let's see if they work. And some of them turned out to be super useful and helpful.
That's interesting to me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just really quick, because he said something that speaks to me. Because the point of our show is actually practical, useful, philosophical advice that you could apply on a daily basis, right? I mean, that's what's your podcast about? Oh, it's a philosophy podcast. Well, okay. Well, what? Well, there's a lot of things that you could. Life is difficult. Life is hard. You could drink yourself to death. You could do drugs, or you learn something that'll help you deal with the troubles of daily life. And that's what we like to do. We like to apply philosophical tenets, and we encourage curiosity, and we encourage creativity. What you said was really interesting. You said Aristotle's great, fantastic, ancient Greeks, but there's not a lot of practical, useful advice as opposed to the Aztecs. Could you just do a little like comparison and contrasting there? Like, give me one example of the Aristotle tenet, and then as opposed to the Aztecs, because that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. Ultimately, at a high level, what I realized is that there's probably a way to think about ethical theories, their principles, the procedures for how philosophers decide about like how you assess right action. And then there are these other traditions, Stoicism, Buddhism, the Aztecs, that focus on what Pierre Hadot would have called spiritual exercises. And we don't have a good name for it. In Greek, it was ascesis. An example, Aristotle says moderation or, temperance is a virtue. He gives you one metaphor, a mean between extremes, but ultimately it turns into this like parameterized account. And I got my tenure writing on Aristotle, so I can tell you about the parameterized account and how Aristotelians sort of bicker about that. Okay. The Aztecs have a similar notion for how they look at things, but when it comes to moderation, they specifically give you practices. And I began to drill down into the activities for how they taught their kids. Three things are at the source of it. In the book, I talk about it as willpower because that's the more common way to discuss what's at stake. They distinguish two broad branches: willing to do something and willing not to do something. I have a difficulty resisting sweets. That is willing not to do something. Like put a little muffin in front of me, and it's really just a matter of time before I will eat the darn thing. That is my way of dealing with it, is to have none of these things within my line of sight. As long as I don't see it, it's not too hard for me to resist. But as soon as it's there, okay, there's the temptation to eat the muffin, willing not to do something. On the other branch, you have willing to do something, and that divides into two different parts: high intensity but short-term activities and low intensity long-term activities. So an example of a high intensity short-term activity, I'm actually in upstate New York, is Binghamton. We are known as
That's
part of the
so
Rust.
Lucy, isn't that Lucy's town? I Love Lucy, isn't she from
Yeah,
Binghamton? Yeah,
perhaps.
sorry
Yeah,
about that. It's
yeah,
just Gwen's a
yeah,
big I Love Lucille ball person. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah.
It's true.
Yes.
And I am
Yes.
to candy corn what you are to muffins. Okay, anyway, and it's
Okay.
Halloween season, so I'm in trouble, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we're going to come back to the Halloween thing. So what happened in our area, we're part of the Rust Belt. So people were using those wipes, rather than toilet paper. And effectively that plugged up the sewer system in our area. And one night, about dinner time, if you had a basement, the sewer started backing up. And so sewage started pouring out from our basement sink. It was backing up from
Everyone,
that
like
sink
in the town.
in our neighborhood,
Okay, got it.
everyone in our neighborhood. So it's quite a few houses affected by this thing, a blockage. Water starts coming up, and I had the very disagreeable task of running down into my basement into the poo water to save as many of the things as I could save before, yeah.
Rudy
That
wouldn't do
was
it. Rudy wouldn't do it. Rudy would send his wife
I
or your
would
kids.
light the house on fire because there's a lot of methane there and say, too bad, goodbye. But that's me. But we're talking about him.
yeah.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So,
Sebastian's a good
so
man. Okay.
yeah, so I ran down there, saved my things. Rancid affair, highly disagreeable. Lots of willpower involved in doing that. Short term, though, after that period of time, I was done, right? So that is one kind of willpower, willing to do something, a really high intensity, disagreeable task. That's very different from another thing that I do. I dislike doing squats. I know that I'm supposed to do squats, and I do squats 3 times a week, and you're supposed to do them forever, just forever to be healthy. Okay, that is a very different sort of thing. It's a lot lower intensity, but I just have to do it for a much longer period of time. So that is a different kind of willpower that's involved. Right? Willing to, but not willing to in the intense sense. And what the Aztecs had was a series of practices to help their children develop each kind of willpower. So high intensity kind of short-term activity might be getting up super early. A longer term activity might be, they had a lot of sweeping practices, just like keep your room or area clean and sweep it out. And that's something you just have to do every day because trash and dust and stuff happens every day. That's a lower intensity but higher consistency practice, right? Versus getting up or moving heavy logs around, higher intensity, short duration. And then resistance practices, they would practice fasting, practice not eating the things in front of you, and then they would feast. So it's a fast and a feast, and they would kind of work together. That's an example of the way in which the Aztecs gave you very concrete practices to think about how moderation or willpower works and why you're actually failing at things. So people might think you have a discipline problem or whatever, willpower problem. Yes, but in what sense? Resisting things, doing things consistently, doing high intensity things, which of those is your problem? And distinguishing them will probably help you live a better life because you don't have to fix all of the things. You kind of have to treat them independently. Nothing is in Aristotle is like that. There's not a single passage in Aristotle that will distinguish willpower in that way and say you should do these different things to build will. No. But the Aztecs are filled with stuff like this.
Very helpful. That's a really good distinction. Thank you very much.
So,
That's true.
yeah.
No, I'm
So
just
Glenn,
thinking about reading Aristotle. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's true. I don't know if there's really, you're supposed to find the middle, do the right thing in the right way at the right time, but there's no instruction on, or am I wrong? Or is there,
not very many things. You have to go to the
Okay.
passages. I mean, that's why people preferred the Stoics. And in some ways, if Stoicism took off with all the Silicon Valley people, it's because the Stoics are actually filled with lots lots of little practices to help you do things.
That's a real damn. That's a really good point. You're right. And humans, I think, gravitate towards not every human, but maybe people who are struggling with becoming a better person or getting into shape or moderating their alcohol or whatever that they're doing. They're like, whoa, I need somebody to tell me. Yes, I know I have to do that, but please tell me how. Can you give me a practice? Can you give me a worksheet? Can you give me a habit? And we will gravitate towards different practices or different philosophical approaches to those things that work for us individually. And so if you're the type of person that needs more concrete examples of the how, sounds like the Aztecs is something that you should check out.
Yeah, they're just
Mhm.
filled with this. I think I have 7 spiritual exercises in the book. Okay, you learned some stuff theoretically. How do you apply it? That was going to be the idea.
I have a question about the notion of order and also how that is distinct, that everything has a plan, everything fits. What I see from your work is this idea of the fragility of life, that being fragile is what makes it good, and that the struggle is the value when we're talking about what makes life worth living. So instead of running away from struggle, but that struggle is that opportunity for growth, for connection, that struggle isn't the problem. It's actually what makes life good. Could you expand on that, or did I
Yeah.
paraphrase that
No, no,
right?
I think you did a pretty good job on that.
Yeah.
I was trying to teach my students about this. By the way, a lot of this was sort of workshopped with students. This is how I would explain it to them. Think about the things, it's lesson 2 in there is the things that make your life worth living also make it fragile. This is broaches what is called Aztec pessimism, but we need to be careful about that because it doesn't mean that they were downers about life or something to that extent, right? They thought that life had value if it was enacted virtuously or well. That is the thing that makes it valuable, not, how much stuff you acquire. An example about the things that make life worth living also make it fragile. In the book, I give a thought experiment. I actually give 2 things. One is a historical example of Emiliano Zapata, who actually was a peasant revolutionary, knew Nahuatl, and actually got a start by being able to read the legal documents to give the peasants a legal claim back for their land. This is 1911 in Mexico, 1910. So he knew the language and he was able to help them out. And he lived in a sort of Aztec way. Ultimately, after they succeeded, they overthrew the dictator, Furio Diaz. A new guy, President Madero, was installed. The result is that he found himself not really needing this revolutionary peasant who was also sort of a loose cannon. So they were supposed to meet. They didn't. What Zapata did is he got a note that said, he's not going to meet you here. Let's more or less meet again to talk about getting your people the land back. And he knew at that point that he'd been betrayed, folded up the little telegram note, put it in his pocket. And at the back of his cabin, he had people reporting that troops were also surrounding his cabin. He fled. Ultimately, he was caught. Not then, he got away then, but he ultimately was caught and killed for fighting on behalf of the cause of democracy. And Mexico effectively needed to wait almost another 90 years for democracy. But it's not as if he would have been wrong for trying for democracy. That is a fragile enterprise, but it's a thing worth doing. In a more thought experiment type format, I tell the students, because sometimes the historical example doesn't match. So, okay, you have a grandfather that passed away and he loved you deeply and he bequeaths you his crystal ball, which he says is going to be his most valuable possession. And you think, great, grandpa lost it at the end. Thanks a lot. Everyone else got cars and things, but grandpa gave me a crystal ball. So you decide to give it a little shake. You ask the crystal ball, what is the next cryptocurrency that's going to make me rich? And it gives you a string of letters and you decide to invest. And lo and behold, the next day you are in fact wealthier. So you realize the crystal ball works and you lead your life this way, saving causes, helping the honeybee, maybe not die. And somebody should probably get on that because it affects all of us. Along the way, as you're doing things, you fall deeply in love with another person. And since you ask the crystal ball about everything, you ask it about this other person and you ask, will one of us die soon before the other? Yes. By a lot? And it says, yes. Who? Will I die sooner or will they die sooner? It says they will die sooner. Knowing then that the person that you love will die a lot sooner than you and you'll be forced to anguish their passing, would you do it? And the students are all like, well, yeah, of course. It's just what it means to love someone. They're like, I want to make sure you love them. Yes. Well, yeah, that's just what you ought to do. Like, you're signing up for a lot of pain, though. They're going to die sooner than you and you're going to have to endure that. Yeah, but that's actually sort of every relationship relationship sort of sets you up in that way. It's not different. And that's the point. You wouldn't be wrong to love someone, although you knew that they would die soon. That just also means that it's a good thing. It's fragile and it can harm you, right? So the things that make your life worth living are the very things that introduce fragility and vulnerability into our lives. And the result of that generalizes quite broadly. It means that as a human, you're probably going to pursue things that you consider valuable. Those things are not going to be under your control. Quite unlike the Stoics who tell you to confine your attention to those things under your control, the Aztecs say you can't. The things that are valuable aren't under your control. Relationships, people that we love, they're not. Like they can blow up because the other person cheats on you, or things can be going well. Elon Musk, for example, his first marriage, it sort of blew up because their first child died.
Mm.
They were otherwise kind of okay. And then he, according to his ex-wife's testimony, at least sort of lost it. And they ultimately tried to have more kids and then broke up and whatever else. So you could see how that ruins a marriage. No one did anything wrong, but by engaging in these practices that are valuable, you also open yourself up to those sorts of bad outcomes. They're part of the same thing. And that's why the Aztecs are considered pessimists in a way. It's because they say, well, you're a human. You're going to engage and commit yourself to these vulnerable practices. Some of them will fail. And that means we have a passage, a father talks to his daughter and he says, the cold wind glides, it passes by. He means you're going to suffer. That's part of what it means to be a human. That's just going to befall you. And that has to be part of your outlook. It doesn't mean that you're going to suffer a great tragedy, but no one, if you live long enough, suffers lesser tragedies. It's just part of the outlook. So your conception of how to live a good life has to be informed by these things. And that's why they came to this view that you try to do the best that you can while acknowledging that you're going to slip up and other people will slip up. But for them, ultimately, your mind is chaos. And the better way to go about controlling it is with the help of the people around you, hence outward path. Start outside of you, then move in. Just a final story there as an example. Another one, when we moved into this neighborhood with my wife, we were not used to, we'd been living in cities for so long, we were not used to like the traditional community. And we moved into this community where people walk their children up and down the streets with strollers and dogs, and people sit on their front porches. It's like it's the 1950s. I didn't know this kind of neighborhood existed, but that's what we live in. And so we were told on Halloween to buy candy, expect many trick-or-treaters. And so we bought way too much candy. After the trick-or-treaters came, we just put those into the middle of the dining room on a big old platter, and I can't resist sweets, right? Like I can't. Every time you're going to go anywhere in our house, you have to pass by that thing. So every single time I was eating candy, it was breaking my diet, and it's like, oh, I hate myself for this, but I can't stop. My wife saw that. One day I came home, the platter was empty. She's also a philosopher, so I asked her like, what happened? And she said, oh, I just took it to the department and gave it to the kiddos. And with that, my whole cycle of like guilt and transgression around eating candy was gone. And it's not because I became a better person. I didn't get more willpower. And then that's another marked difference from like Aristotle or something. Like I didn't get more willpower, but my life is better because of the people around me. And that's what the outward path is meant to kind of embody, is that, okay, now I can see that indeed I'm living better, which is the goal, because the people around me are helping me live better.
There's a lot there. Something from, I think it was in John Stuart Mill's work on utilitarianism, when he was trying to talk about happiness, he does talk about these higher levels of happiness and that there is a higher risk and potential cost. I was reminded of that when you were saying that, because it's one of those paradoxes. Let's say for the athlete who trains and trains and then can achieve so much and has this experience of excellence we won't be able to experience, but the cost if something goes wrong with their body is just far more extreme than, let's say, if something goes wrong with my body. I mean, it's not good, but it wouldn't be as impacted. Or, you know, somebody like Iris Murdoch, the literary genius who starts to lose her memory. It's different, and that paradox. But I like that you're saying that the Aztecs are accepting that that is the struggle of life. That is it. It's not that it shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. And
I liken that to the sort of the circumstances of justice that David Hume has, or something like that, that basically any account, what the heck are we doing as philosophers when we're talking about ethics? Well, any account of ethical theory ought to be action guiding, right? And it has to be action guiding for humans. So there are constraints that you need to put on any account in order for that to work for us, and not angels, right? And so the way that I think of the Aztecs Aztecs when they're talking about these things is they're basically saying like, look, you're grown up, you're an adult, as usually an older person talking to a younger person, but like the father and mother talking to the child, they're saying like, you're of age now. You can see what people are like in the world. You've been around for, 16 years. All right, this stuff happens. Any sensible wisdom about what to do in this world has to acknowledge that this happens. It happens regularly to everyone. And if you're trying to pursue the good life, as we would say, without cognizance of these, then whatever proposal you have is naive. Right? I think the Aztecs would look at a lot of ethical philosophy out of the West and dismiss it as like woefully naive. Like, what are you even doing talking about these things with that? Hoping to avoid lesser tragedies or something.
I understand. I'm certainly somebody who tries not to accept things like death. I just don't accept it. But we don't need to get into that here. That's a whole series of episodes about transferring myself into a computer. This is not about me. What about those people who are just like, you know what? I don't want to watch the news. I don't want to watch the news. It's depressing. It's sensationalistic. Life is difficult as it is. No matter how great your life is, everybody suffers problems. And you know what? Truth be told, I'm kind of one of those people. I used to be somebody who used to watch the news kind of religiously, used to read the news religiously. Now I just check like one news aggregator just to make sure that like I'm up to date, what's going on in the world, and I haven't really missed anything crazy. But I wouldn't call it avoidance. It was just, there is a choice, if you will, with not going down the rabbit hole of negativity. Now,
right.
You could argue to say, yeah, obviously the news is going to put all the bad stuff that's happening in the world because it sells papers. There's a bias. There's people who are trying to make money. We're in a capitalistic society, and believe me, I'm a capitalist. I got no problem with that. But you got to look at it through that filter. But still, those things are, if you believe the news, and that's a whole other segment, happening. So what's the balance there? What is it where it's like, well, yeah, you got to accept things. These things are happening. And like for anybody that's not doing that, they're not being real versus sticking in the rabbit hole. So what do the Aztecs say about that?
Yeah, this is just discussions about constraints of what pursuing the good life is. You're not supposed to dwell on it. You're supposed to acknowledge it, though. These things happen. Yeah, ideally, they would class it under right speech, and I wonder what they would think about our news, but like the sort of toxicity of learning about stuff that just doesn't even matter to you at all. Like, you should probably avoid all of that stuff. We're kind of really high level, like, what the heck are you trying to do with your life? And, well, you're a human. You're going to commit yourself to valuable things. Valuable things are fragile because they're not under your control. Some of them will fail. That means you will suffer. That's the kind of line of reasoning that you just need to acknowledge. And then you can say like, okay, well, fine, that sucks. What can I do? Pessimism is a step into finding a solution. You don't like sit there and dwell on it. The response that they give is like, okay, you kind of need to get a better sense. One of them, I said that it's not everything is under your control. That's true. But there are a few other things. Like, it's fantastically strange in which the ways in which humans can mess up. The example I give in the book is of Trent Reznor, and I'm certainly dating myself for age there. Way back in 1999, he was on the cover of Spin magazine when people read magazines. He was the, artist of the year. They did an interview with him, and the interviewer asked, because he knew that Trent Reznor was depressed, and apparently at that point in his life, although he was, international rock star, multimillionaire, all of those things, he would wake up every morning and decide whether or not to shoot himself. And the interviewer asked, why? What is going on here? And he said, well, look, what if you got everything you ever wanted and it still sucked? This is what we call disillusionment. Disillusionment is failure by way of success. It is a peculiar kind of failure where you get exactly what you wanted and it was the wrong thing to get. So humans are resourceful in our abilities to fail. We're going to slip up. We're going to slip up on the minor things. We're going to slip up on the major things. We'll even slip up in achieving the goals that we think we want. That's what it means to be a human. It's another feature there that you need to keep in mind. And then, okay, what do I do about it? And that's why the Aztecs said, well, look, it's complicated. There's a lot of what we would call moral luck. They have passages that almost seem like they're written by Bernard Williams about moral luck, right? It's pervasive. It's there. It's a feature of our lives. The best you can do then is learn to lean on other people in the right way. And then here's a series of practices for how you can do that more effectively. Because the goal for them isn't to like avoid meditation. Unlike the Buddhists, right, where the goal is to like still the mind, go out into the world. Here's a bunch of meditative practices, and 10 years later you can act well. I'm oversimplifying, and all my Buddhist friends will say that was totally wrong. I know. I'm speaking hyperbolically in order to characterize the differences of inflection in the
Hmm.
traditions. Okay, but you're starting here and you're going out. For the Aztecs, you're going out and you try to come back in. Eventually, they did have practices like meditation. They called it teomania, and you would meditate, and those things totally matter. They're just sort of after. I've asked my students, have any of you ever tried breath meditation? Have either of you guys ever tried doing breathing meditation where you try to just pay attention to your breath?
I have tried. If the answer is
Okay.
have you tried?
Yeah.
Successful. Rudy and I both have brains
Not
that's
true.
bouncing
I
all over the
told
place.
Hold on a second.
I,
You need to go back and listen to our episodes. Where do I meditate? You don't remember the where? In a sauna with a bunch of naked
Oh
dudes?
God.
Because it's the best place. It's the
I
best
had
place to close your
deliberately
eyes and
let
be
that
really
exit my
Such a
uncomfortable.
brain.
Do you know
traumatic
how uncomfortable it
experience.
is at like 180
I
degrees
didn't,
and
I
like
did,
just
I
a bunch
didn't.
of dudes in towels and they're chatting? That's a great place to meditate. That's how
I am
powerful I am.
super caffeinated right now, and I didn't need that on my
Yeah.
caffeinated brain. Okay,
Yeah.
Sebastian, please
Yeah, no,
continue.
the point was I have tried doing breathing meditation and I'm terrible at it. And I'm told that you will get better if you practice over time and it will have all of these beneficial effects. I'm also an impatient person. What would be better is if I just kind of identified what my problems were and then just had somebody else in my life help like fix them. My wife with the candy, those sorts of things. Like you find somebody else to like fix your things and you get immediate like, "Oh, wow, it's better today." There's an advantage to leaning on people around you who are good at that, as opposed to like waiting 10 years until, you fix your breathing meditation and you can concentrate better. And now all of a sudden you don't have any, like, then presumably my willpower goes up and I'm not tempted by the muffin anymore. I've transcended it or something. But that's just the difference of approach. It's not the Aztecs think that doesn't matter. It's just like, well, if you want something better today, you want to live better now, find people who will help you live better now. That's going to have pretty direct effects.
Okay. Now that you said so, I have one thought, and then now I have another question. When they might actually be connected, though, because when I think of the virtue ethics from Aristotle, character development, develop of the mind, and then those virtues, they do imply an other. So, for example, if you master being just, you can't do that alone. Like there has to be
Right.
somebody else. Or courage, you can't be courageous alone. So that the virtues actually do imply an other.
Right.
I'm wondering the way in which you're talking about the Aztecs is that this is a more of a community. Where is the starting point, or does there have to
Hmm.
be a starting point? And then the other question I have, as you were talking, I remembered that later in the book, there was a discussion about justice. There was a view towards women that was more encompassing, where women had more autonomy, looked more as partners in the society. And so I am wondering now, in conjunction with the Aristotelian idea of developing the virtue, and then that radiates out, if this notion of community as part of successful and good life, the reliance on others, if there isn't something in, let's say, American culture with this notion of independence that's tied to masculinity,
Hmm.
if that at all hinders one's ability to
Hmm.
enjoy their good life, because you have contemporary issues right now of, like, let's say, the male loneliness epidemic, or people are on their phones and they're so isolated. There's also this idea of this hyper independence, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Femininity is community. I'm just wondering
Yeah.
if you see if any of that is involved here. I don't even know if I'm formulating this
No,
correctly.
I think you've got two things there. You're right, and they are related. So let
Okay.
me let me go to the first portion of that, which is about the virtue ethical relationship. So when we're talking about the outward path, we're down at the level of spiritual exercises. Like how do you acquire the virtues? That's the difference here, is difference in like the order of the practices. Of course, all virtues kind of imply other people. So when you have them, you're there, but how do you acquire them more effectively? At that level, I'm just saying Buddhists are going to say start with meditation. Again, oversimplifying. Don't hate me, Buddhists. They won't. They're too nice. The Stoics might take more umbrage with me, but they're going to
Hmm.
say start on the inside. The Aztecs are going to say start on the outside. Those are the practices to acquire the virtues. Add up one level of theory, of course, the virtues imply other people, etc., etc. And there is a difference there, which is more theoretical, that we could go into about the character of shared agency and the virtues. We'll put a pin in that. I think to your other point about masculinity is kind of interesting. The Aztecs did think that the virtues were supported by social roles. Ultimately, if you're going to be more communal and you're doing things with other people, everyone has different social roles, and you're going to need rituals to coordinate your social role interaction more effectively. Otherwise, it's kind of chaos. So the rituals, although partly religious, had a coordinating effect in which they allowed people to like do things together. Some of those social roles were gender based. I will say that for the Aztecs, but the way they thought about gender and the way we think about gender are different. One idea there is crying. Crying was seen as strong masculine activity. We have examples of Nezahualpili crying after the death of his son and those sorts of things, and went off into a house, a palace, and that's where he stayed. It was called a Palace of Tears because he cried after his son's death. Okay. And that was considered masculine and just a thing you did. So, yes, although they did have kind of varied from city to city, and I would really need like an expert historian on just this point, but they did have semi-rigid social roles. They crossed in different ways. What was considered masculine and what was considered feminine were very different from ours. Also, this idea of individualism would have made just no sense. That would have just been considered dumb. Not masculine, not feminine, just naive. Like nobody does that. Nobody lives on their own. What is wrong with you? So a failure to like tough
They're
it
always
out.
the first to go in a horror flick, right, Rudy? The person, the person who's like, you know what? I'm not going to be with the group. I'm going to go figure this out. And they're always the first one to go. Okay. Anyway, we went back to the Aztec. Let's back to this. Definitely, we evolved to be social creatures. And so it almost seems like this idea of this hyper independence, it's not actually going to get somebody where they want to go.
That's where I think that there's a good way in which you can maybe appropriate this into our contemporary culture is, a masculine thing is thinking well. Okay, fine. How are you supposed to do that as an Aztec? In groups, because no one realistically knows enough stuff, right? So if you have a hard decision, if you have a regular decision, you won't even notice it. You just make your decision. But if you have a hard decision, you want to go talk to people. And the thing that, most people don't do is think carefully about the people in their circle for making those hard decisions. I try to have my students do this Aztec decision circle. We have passages where merchants would travel abroad. You have to remember that traveling back in the day was perilous. They would, travel to another city. You can get robbed. You can, just get ill. It took a long time. Weather elements. They would convene before traveling before traveling to other cities. They would sit in a semicircle. The oldest or the most experienced would sit at the top of the circle, and the children would be invited on the ends, and everyone could discuss, although the people who had the most experience would have the most say. That's kind of a model for group deliberation. Like, who do you trust when you have a hard decision to make? I ask my students about that, and they're like, oh, my parents or my brother or somebody like that. Okay, how many different points of view do you have? Do you have somebody who always disagrees with you, but in the nicest way, ideally, who will disagree with and shoot your ideas down? How do you assess whether or not somebody has good judgment? Do you even pay attention to that? I mean, the Aztec idea more or less is, well, they've done it recently, so they might know better. Track their judgment over time. Some people are just better at giving advice than other people, and you can track it. But most people don't even notice those things. Part of the practice of developing better practical wisdom is actually forming a circle, being aware of it, being aware of who you ask for your hard decisions, whether or not you're living in an echo chamber. And Rudy, to go to your point about the news, I think that's maybe the only thing you need to know about the news is to make sure that you're not living in an echo chamber, especially right now. It's so hard. Right, you can just slip
Amen.
right.
It's so true. We talk about the problem of echo chambers. We've been talking about that for years, not just in this current environment or even in the prior environment. The issue is algorithms that are out there on social media where the vast majority of people today get their news. The fact that people get their news on TikTok. Call me an old fuddy-duddy. I'm not. I'm a Gen Xer. I also got a brain and I've got critical thinking skills. Is shocking to me. And I find it offensive. But whatever. Okay, sorry. You're complaining about Buddhists and offending them. If I had just offended a bunch of TikTok users, my bad. But yeah, no, I talk about the problem of echo chambers, and what I'd like to do actually is the news aggregator site that I go to. It's not necessarily 100% aligned with my beliefs per se, but I like to see what's out there. I like to educate myself. I like to listen to other viewpoints. In fact, on this show, I think we've done a terrific job of trying to get as many people from the spectrum as possible. Not necessarily, on the far left or anybody on the far right. No, thanks. But we try to get reasonable people that have different viewpoints, explain those viewpoints. We ask critical thinking thinking questions and we talk about them, we make people think a little differently. I'd say that we try to promote anti-echo chamber approaches on the show. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's like Aztec philosophy in action right there. Here's the thing that I guess is not typically spoken about developing good practical judgment. It's uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable with the feedback that you're getting, it's comfortable to have news come in that confirms our biases. If you're not feeling uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong.
That's
Right?
a good point.
If everything feels good, they're just telling you what you want to hear. So that's an Aztec way of thinking about echo chambers. A point about TikTok that I tried. I'm also a Gen X, just barely, Rudy, by 4 days, but I made it. So
I will accept you. I'm the gatekeeper, and what you're speaking here to allows you in.
All right.
Did you ever
Excellent.
play Red Rover?
I did.
Okay.
Yes.
You're
That's
Gen X.
ridiculous. I've never played that game. That's crazy.
Rudy, you would have knocked everyone over. We were crazy. Were you feral too? Wait. Did your parents just kick you out and then say come back before the lights come back?
Yeah.
You're Gen X.
I wasn't really kicked out, but I kind of like went out. I definitely rode my bike to places that I probably shouldn't have, in bike lanes really non-existent. And back then there were no helmets, and thank God I used to have a brain in my head, kind of.
Sebastian, have you ever used a payphone?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, you're Gen X. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
continue.
no.
What are your thoughts about TikTok?
So with this thing, the younger members of my team were trying to tell me like, okay, like you got to learn about social media on TikTok. So I decided, fine, I'll put it on my phones. I have a couple of phones, so I'll put it on my phone that I think I can not be spied on too much. I will try to use this darn thing. I learned two things about it. One, I find it boring. I just don't find it very interesting because nobody can say anything interesting in 30 seconds. And it just didn't stick. It was a chore for me to try to use TikTok for 15 minutes a day. And I eventually just stopped because it was boring. But the one time I did use it for something is because I've been going on a bunch of these podcasts. A thing that men don't typically need to learn is makeup. So I was like, how do I do like makeup for podcast stuff? And it turned out it was pretty useful, but it was a bunch of, I have a Latino background. So I ended up looking at makeup tips from a bunch of Latinas on TikTok, and they gave really good advice. But then that algorithm thought I was a Latina, reinforced the way the echo chamber works. And so it just started feeding me all of this stuff as if I was a Latina the whole time, which got really bizarre. But it speaks to the power of these algorithms, how quickly they go on things, they make a lot of assumptions, and then they just start feeding you confirming items.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite of what you need if you're going to live a good life, because you will live in an echo chamber and your judgment will suffer. To bring it back to the philosophical point, I'll close with the story and why I think that the Aztecs were partly aware of this, but it's useful to investigate for just practical living, because there's a way in which philosophers can act like, oh, you always have the choice of doing the right thing or something like that. When my uncle, he dropped out of school at the age of 11 to learn to play the harp. My uncle, when he was 12, he went out after learning how to play the harp, and he would play at various bands and whatever else. So parents on that side, they weren't exactly street performers. They did gigs and whatever else. So he was playing at a quinceañera when he was, I think, 16. He was a wealthy family. This is a big celebration in Mexico. When girls turn 15, it was supposed to traditionally be the age at which they were presentable for marriage, which is sort of a shocking cultural difference on its own. Although the United States, we had sweet 16, so it's not that much later. So he's at one of these celebrations. He was the harpist. Some federales came by, so the federal police kind of military, they came by. They started just poking around. Well, all of the ranchers that were with him, a bunch of them came up and started putting their guns and drugs into the hole in the underside of his harp so that they wouldn't be caught. And so he's the 16-year-old now having to play this out-of-tune harp. Eventually, the feds went away. Nothing happened. It raises an ethical question, like, what should he have done? A person, I'm reminded of a Machiavellian point, like that a good man among wholly bad men will come to ruin. Like, if he had just been naive and said, like, oh, look, police officers, all of these men put their drugs and guns in my harp. Even if the police weren't corrupt, that would have been the end of him, right? On the other hand, he effectively aided the drug dealers. It turned out he was, the rancheros that he was at, they were also drug dealers. He effectively aided them in avoiding, detection by the police. What do you do? Well, I mean, that was the better choice for survival. It doesn't amount to a tragic situation. There was no good option, but it's not like the options were tragically bad. It's just that the situation was morally burdened. He didn't have a good solution there. The more that I've come to reflect on that feature of our lives, it is sort of in keeping with Aztec pessimism in a way, but it's also, I think, a pervasive feature of our lives. How many times have people stayed in jobs where they really weren't the best? I've known some women who've stayed in jobs where somebody in power has a history of sexual harassment, but they can't quite leave yet because they need the paycheck, and so you're stuck in these bad situations. They're relatively pervasive, and philosophers aren't addressing that. They typically, as ethicists, we try to say like, oh, well, it's a bad action, so, and I'm on my way. But if a good chunk of our human lives consist of this, let's say 25%, then you're ignoring what it's like to be a human. And I typically find that alternative sources or traditions, or even might be called folk philosophers, are more informative about this. Reading the biography of Malcolm X might explain more about this than reading Aristotle.
Yeah.
Who, as far as I know, never mentions it at all or conceives of it. And that's kind of where my current work has been focused in a popular domain. It just seems like it's overlooked, and it's a follow-on in a way of this like Aztec approach to thinking about living better.
It did seem to have a bit of existential weavings in there. I'm going to give a quiz to my students, and they just read No Exit by Sartre. And so maybe that's on my mind is also I'm reading your book, because I'm thinking there's some existential threads in here. And then I saw that you wrote that you were impacted or, thinking about Nietzsche's work. And I thought, oh, okay, I see it.
Forever, always thinking a little bit about Nietzsche in that, right? Yeah.
I am very grateful for your book. I was really excited because I was presented with this work and I thought, I know nothing about the Aztecs. I'm very excited. It was really nice to see the weaving and the contrast with Western philosophy. And I thought, okay, I can get some of this. So I just appreciate your work so much. I learned more today. I'm glad that, our listeners are going to have a chance to learn about Aztec thinking, the outward path, community, suffering, struggle. No, it's not suffering, it's struggle. That's part of what makes life good.
Good and beautiful.
Yeah, if there was no struggle, that would,
it cheapens the value of it, doesn't it, in a way?
Yeah. All right. Cheers to struggle and the Aztecs.
Right. Sebastian, this was great. Great book, great stuff. Really appreciate you coming on.
Good is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolsky and Rudy Sallow. If you're enjoying the pod, please subscribe, follow, share it with a friend, and leave a 5-star rating and review. We now have 2 publications to help you with podcasting and doing a deep dive in philosophy, Philosophy Unplugged, and Interview with Intention. Check out the show notes or go to our website, goodisinthedetails.com, for more information. You can also get in touch with us there at goodisinthedetails.com. We're on Facebook, Good is in the Details Pod, and Instagram, Good is in the Details Pod. Okay, until next time, bye.